Hey everyone, it's Kristen, and today I've got a video for you on dealing with creating switch statements and how they work. I wanted to go into this to give you guys an idea of how to set up your own switch statements for various problems you might encounter in CSCI 1300 and beyond. So, a switch statement is basically a logical operation that requires some kind of an integer. In this example, what I did was I've created a function called checkDay, which takes in some number, and what it's going to do is it's going to switch and print the day of the week based on the number. And the idea is that we want the user to enter something between 0 and 6, and if it is something other than that, we're going to use our default case or default condition to give some kind of an invalid syntax. So the first thing I want you to notice that this is a void function, and if you need to use a return in a void, you can. You want to remember that a void that uses a return command is basically saying the return command here, instead of returning a value, it's saying just go back to where the function was called. Just return to main. That's another way of saying return, right? It's basically saying return to the main and continue to execute the code. So here, notice that we have set up the switch based on some value that's coming in, that's an integer. This value is going to correspond with the different case numbers here. And you can see that each one of these cases has its own scope operation brackets, and it has a break statement included. And there's going to be some process. Maybe it's a print command, or maybe it's some kind of calculation or something, or maybe it's a function call. But something is going to happen before the break statement inside of the case subscope. And we have a case here for each one of the days of the week, with Sunday being the 0 position and 6 being the Saturday. Now, whenever one of these gets entered, the first thing that will happen is that it will go here and check the num against the case number. It will go into the subscope and print if it's that day, and then it will break, meaning it will go out of the switch logic and go down to the end of our function and get returned back to main. So, to show how this works, let's run this code. I'm going to set this up and save it, and go over here and run my case. And I'm actually going to take out the function call from my other function because I have a separate type of case with switches that I wanted to show you as well. So you can see here that I have defined a base value for num day. So I have an integer value for a variable called num day, which I'm setting just to 0 right off the bat. And I'm going to ask the user to input something that's either between 0 or between 0 to 6, with Sunday being specified specifically as 0. And I'm going to store that in the variable. So I'm going to store user-defined input, and then I'm going to pass that to my function through the function call here on line 107. So if we run this function, let's run it in debugger and see what happens. So I'm going to set a breakpoint here. I'm going to turn on my debug mode, and I'm going to go ahead and run the program. So let's see here. I want to show you what happens when we enter, say, a value that's larger. So let's say we enter 8. We can see here that the number is being saved over on the side, and we want to step through the program and see that it goes directly to the default here because it did not meet any of the other cases. So we have an if check here. We're going to print that that was invalid, and then we're going to return. The return is going to take us directly back to the line right after the function call, and we're going to exit our program. So let's try that again, this time with a correct or valid input. So let's try case 5. So we go to the switch. Switch recognizes that we're going into case 5 because of the value of 5. It then prints that it's Friday, and then finishes its task and goes back to main. So this is a good example of how cases work when you have breaks included inside of each one of the case scopes. So the break stops the case, and then it goes down and returns at the bottom of the function. Now, let's look at a different type of a switch case. I'm going to uncomment my second switch function, and I'm going to just deal with it. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this scope, and let's take a look at what's going on here. So this is a different example of how a switch works. If we don't include the break statements inside of our case subscopes, inside of our case brackets, what's going to happen is that we're going to print something, then move on to the next case in succession, and start dealing with the subscopes one at a time. So if we specify 0 as the beginning of our sequence, we would start printing 1, then 2, then 3, and so on, until we see a break statement, or we finish the end of the program. The other thing is that if we have something here that is a default, it'll also go directly to the default, even if there is a setup like this where it starts up at some line and comes down to some break. So the idea is that, say we were to put in a break statement on case 3, we would not print all the way down to case 6, we would only print from the 0 case to the case that had a break included in it. So in this case, say we started, let's start the sequence here by running it, where if I set a breakpoint here, this will be a lot more apparent. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with some user-defined input. I'm going to start with 0 just to show what happens. So it's going to print this sequence. It's going to check the number. We're going to go to the 0 case. We're going to print 1. And notice that we switch down to the next case right below it because there is no break statement. We're printing 2, now 3, now 4, now 5. We're going to continue printing until we reach a break statement, which stops the entire switch case and goes to the end of the program. So, just like before, say we were to run this and start halfway through, so we could specify case 3, and we would not print the first couple of cases. We're going to go directly to the sequence that is related to that number and start printing again until we reach our break statement. So this is the two main ways the switches are set up in C++. I wanted to give you guys a brief overview of how to set up your own switch cases, and I hope that this helps you with some of your problems coming up in CSCI 1300. Thanks, and have a good one.